5. Dagh is icebound. The Great Pass, July 14th. Trust in God, but make sure that you tie your camel too. Living Prince Rajab embraced the travellers warmly as he escorted them next day to the caravan trail beside the mulberry meadows. And go in safety to your next halting place. The quotation from the sayings of the Prophet was especially appropriate, Adam thought, as he gingerly mounted the small and skittish Bactrian camel which Rajab had given him. This was his first time on such an animal, but at dawn on the high plateau he already felt warm, sitting between its double humps. Azambai preferred the job of caravan master, after the aristocratic courtesies, as he called them. Being born in the Soviet Union, even if one was of noble descent, did not exactly give one a taste for the mixed blessings of a court. Hospitality there might be, but there was also an air of sophistication that he found unsettling. He preferred the directness of the Nuristanis, who weren't at all affected by the castle's pomp, or the behaviour of the Afghan soldiers, who had their own, more direct ways and conversation. After all, he was a professional military man. The prince sent a guide, Razan Resolute Khan, with the company. Razan was a wrestler, specializing in the ancient form of the sport popular with the Central Asians. Its exponents covered themselves with olive oil, flapped their arms like birds when approaching their match, and had to be able to perform a complicated dance as well. Razan was bulky but very muscular, short and barrel-chested like many Hindu Kush mountaineers, and he spoke several of the many languages of Afghanistan. He also carried a heavy leather bag containing big gold coins of the minting of the old Bokhara amirs, from which he paid at every halt for all the expenses of the party. The eagle was hardly in a position to object, but when he did demur, more for the look of it than for any other reason, Razan grunted. The prince could not have guests paying for anything while they were still in his country. There were more sarais and tea-houses on the road as they travelled through the area which was now more Turkic than Persian. Here, at several thousand feet, the neat, vine-covered wooden buildings offered shade, refreshment and conversation of a kind which, in other countries, would have spoken of extreme refinement. The road, if that was the right name for it, still passed through gorges, skirted ravines with foaming rivers rushing through them, and meandered between fields of oats and barley, clover grown for fodder, and wild turnips. In some of the villages, people made baskets and leather goods, cloth and silverware. They sold these items to merchants travelling in caravans, who passed this way once or twice a year, trading salt, trinkets, and manufactured goods from northern Turkestan. The people, slant-eyed and broad-faced, brought out bowls of mare's milk, pieces of embroidered felt, bunches of wild parsnips, mountain garlic, and beautiful Gadi sheep, whose ewes lambed twice a year. The travellers drank tea with salt instead of sugar to replace the saline in their blood, which they had lost in the exertions of the mountain trail. Nur passed many an hour, stolen from her rest time, learning the precise way to soak the delicious bread in the tangy tea, to milk sheep and goats, in trying on wildcat jackets, bargaining for strange jewellery or deerskin boots. One did not really need money, for the people delighted in barter, and would consider anything as a possible article of trade. Even if one bought nothing, bargaining was expected. Later, if God wills, brought smiles. Adam tried once or twice to say, "I am at war, I don't buy trinkets." It didn't work. The area seemed utterly isolated from the war. At Cedar Gorge, a village perched on the escarpment of the southern Hindu Kush, the village chief pointed with pride to the rolling meadows and flower gardens, but warned Adam of the dangers of the climb that was before him. "To escape the Rus, you will have to take the ancient way, directly north from here," he said. "But that means that you could easily lose your way if there are too many landslides, ice avalanches even. I do not recommend it, sir." They could read the problem, written by nature into the very landscape. They could see the cedar and oak forests about 2,000 meters above. Then, further up the mountain, the tall pines began, and continued, becoming sparser, to a height where perpetual ice was visible. Just below this wound the road, round and round, gaining a few feet every 100 yards, up to the great pass, no more than a cleft between two blue-white glaciers, the gateway through the Hindu Kush, the road to Turkestan. Here, at Cedar Gorge, they were not much more than 60 kilometers to the west of the Russian north-south road, which was constantly patrolled by Soviet aircraft to keep it clear of bandits. For the first time since they had escaped from the Kohistan foothills, they saw, as well as heard, Russian helicopters, the big ones, Mi-24s, on reconnaissance. "Nobody has come through the pass for the past 2 weeks," said the village chief. "That worries me, because traders always want to come here at this time of year, and we generally get one caravan, sometimes two, big and small, every week." "So you think the high pass may be blocked?" Adam asked him. "Either that, or else one of the smaller ravines through which the road passes is impassable on the northern side. You cannot tell from here." He shielded his eyes against the glare and looked towards the looming mountain. "Well," said the captain, "we have already done our share of clearing rocks from the road wherever we found them thus far. Perhaps someone coming the other way will do the same for us." They set off as soon as the sun was warm enough, saying goodbye to the once taciturn Razan, who now bear-hugged everyone and seemed genuinely sorry to see them go. When the caravan was 100 yards up the incline they were to follow, Adam looked back and saw Razan still standing there, beside his beautiful Indarabi horse, flapping his arms up and down, the ancient victory signal of the great wrestlers of the mountains. The south face of the mountain had no villages, but there were, here and there, rough rest houses of undressed stone, with wooden doors into which people and animals crowded as soon as the sun went down. The drop in temperature was rapid and frightening. One moment the travellers were savouring the last rays of the sun, the next, it seemed, they were huddling deeper into their furs. Shivering, they coaxed their animals, who always themselves wanted to shelter as soon as it became as cold as this. Upwards they climbed to reach the miserable, but yet unutterably welcome, hovels which would save them from freezing to death. And this was summertime. "Haraka, haraka, on, on." The chant was almost continuous now. Above 2,500 meters, 8,000 feet high, the road was too slippery to give the animals any foothold. The sun, which warmed them just enough to make the daytime journey endurable, also affected the icy ground underfoot, making it so glassy that the horses' hooves often could not get a proper grip. Their grooms claimed that, at this height, only yaks could climb higher. As they rested on the third day out of Cedar Gorge, the insistence of the grooms became impossible to resist. Threatened with firearms, they would not budge. Adam refused to pay them, but they only answered that they would rather have nothing than die falling off a cliff. Shada Haidar, who had come this way to join the Eagle after the death of Captain Juma, swore that he had been with caravans which had managed to cover even worse ground than this. Everyone found it hard to believe him. In the end, the hired men and their animals were paid off. Shouldering their 48-pound packs, stripped of luxuries and unnecessary weight, the guerrillas struggled on. Unaccustomed to walking, it took them 2 more days to get into good enough condition to make any real progress. Here and there, mercifully and to their great surprise, the trail was clear. Something, and nobody could work out what, perhaps underground hot springs, made the path ice-free for quite long stretches of the way. Sometimes, therefore, they were able to make good progress. Nevertheless, it seemed as if they had been on the road for months, years even. In fact, by then it had only been 11 days. They got through the high pass safely enough. It was like something from a film about exploration in the region of the North Pole. The pass itself, formed by a fissure between 2 mountains, was nothing more than a cleft with peaks on either side, peaks of ice with ice underfoot, ice ahead, everywhere the blue glare of ultraviolet glinting from 1,000 ice faces. There was no sign of any other caravan or of an icefall which would have blocked the road. Once or twice they found great humps, making the road like a switchback, undulating for miles. These were caused by avalanches which had been partly cleared or had half melted, making it just possible, with great effort, to climb up the small hill and slide down the other side, ready for the next inevitable mound. Beyond the pass, they had expected to see a scene like the one from which they had come, the pines shading down to the cedars, then the oaks, and then perhaps smiling valleys and pastures, herds of goats and sheep, villages and friendly faces. In fact, all that they could see, with the trail winding away into the distance, was a deep fissure, without snow or ice, a gouge like the brown of an iced cake showing through the frosting, running for some 100 yards until it ran out at another wall of ice. That was why there were no caravans, no travellers. The road was blocked. When they reached the wall, Adam and the captain at once realized that this was not something that anyone, could clear away. There had been an icefall, not just an avalanche, but the subsidence of a small, partly melting glacier, or even, perhaps, a small earthquake. A piece of ice, solid and weighing thousands of tons, had slid down from a plateau above and shattered into the cleft through which the road formerly went. Then it had refrozen. There was no doubt about it. They had a mountain to cross. "This," said Haidar, "is Dagh, the Black Mountain. It is snow and ice on the other side too. The only good thing we can say about the situation is that this is the last barrier between us and Turkestan. If we get over it, we shall have reached some sort of safety." On more close inspection, the ice-encrusted walls on either side of the icefall were neither sheer nor completely solid. Here and there one could see what looked like goat tracks. Perhaps later in the summer, say by late August, it might even be possible to traverse it without too much difficulty. So, although possible now, it would be very difficult indeed. And they were too heavily laden. They would have to abandon their arms. Sorrowfully, they collected their weapons and ammunition, piled them in stacks, and covered them with snow. This lightened each man's load by more than 30 pounds. Estimating that the crossing should take 2 days at the most, they shed all food except what they would need for that time. They kept, too, grease, a kettle and butane gas lamp, and a few medicines for each group of 5. Then they started the climb. They had reckoned without the absence of shelter huts, and the fact that some of the party were better climbers, younger, in better physical condition than others. They had no climbing gear, no ropes, no proper boots. None of them had any experience of mountaineering. In that first day they reached the top of a peak to find that it led nowhere. As night fell, the 60 huddled together, keeping one another just warm enough to survive, their faces covered with blankets, breathing painfully and dozing fitfully in the thin air. The next day, seeing a path below, they split into 4 parties to test the ground, since the ice was often cracked, with fissures covered in places by only a thin layer of crushed ice. It was as if the whole mountain was surfaced with an ice whose brittleness was of an unusual order. The third day, as they were skirting an outcrop of black rock along a wide ledge of ice, 20 men, without a sound, disappeared into a fissure which opened up ahead of them suddenly at the same moment that the whole ledge on which they stood collapsed. With a rumbling like rolling thunder, thousands of tons of ice came sliding down the slope above them like a diabolical mechanism, something from a nightmare, and slowly, with uncanny finality, sealed their grave. The men and women of the commando struggled on, tears freezing on their faces, so numbed by the disaster that they did not know if they felt fear or horror more strongly, shaken by uncontrollable shivering, some seeing evil spirits or, in Kasim's case, the leering faces of fat, well-fed Russians in big warm fur caps, looking down from the sky. On the 3rd and 4th days they had no food at all to eat. Water was thawed from the ice after what seemed an age. The pressure in the butane gas cylinder had almost gone. Every half hour they had to stop and exercise, rubbing their swollen eyes to get the small muscles to work again, reeling from snow blindness, retching from mountain sickness. Then they plodded on again. They moved in pairs now, a stronger helping a weaker one, until they found that it needed 3 people, and then 4, to maintain any kind of progress. Those who had the strength spoke encouragingly to others. People who had any power left in their arms pummeled those who lay down and asked to be left to die. Several seemed to have a sort of fever, a trip hammer thumping in the back of their heads, noses bleeding. They were all chewing anything made of soft leather to get some nourishment, or at least some sense of eating. On the morning of the 4th day, a whole duster, 5 of the Nuristanis, holding onto one another, fell over a yawning precipice onto jagged ice rocks, 300 feet below the trail. The survivors looked over at them helplessly, were almost relieved to see that there was nothing that they could attempt to do. The men were undoubtedly dead, smashed on the ice. Haraka, haraka, bala, bala, move, move, upwards, upwards. Every step, every breath was torture now. Just before mid-morning, struggling to the top of a bank of snow, Captain Azambai, limping from a wound where a boulder had hit him as it rolled down the mountain just after the high pass, looked over the ridge. There, beyond a rolling downward incline, he saw, unbelieving, a screen of small trees, then some larger ones, then, rising from the snow and ice, a mountain and a valley carpeted in green. They had conquered the Hindu Kush.